Good evening. My name is Sarah Paulson, and I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining me for my presentation on how teacher attitude and professional development affect implementation of best practices and inclusion as related to instructing students with autism. In 2013, Camargo and Rispoli defined autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, as a lifelong pervasive developmental disorder with no known causes or cure. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the prevalence of ASD is approximately 1 in 59 children, occurs in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups, and is 4 times more common among boys than girls. As per the data compiled by the American Speech Language Hearing Association in 2018, the prevalence of ASD has increased since the 1960s, but they noted that researchers attribute this to an increased awareness of ASD alongside changes in practices regarding assessing for and diagnosing autism. Since this increased prevalence is relatively novel, available research pertaining to evidence-based best practices involving strategies and interventions for students with ASD is not necessarily robust, but it is a growing field with increasing demands placed upon it. In 2010, Odom, Collett-Klingenberg, Rogers, and Hatton published a study titled Evidence-Based Practices and Interventions for Children and Youth with Autism Spectrum Disorders. The focus of this study was to determine the prevalence and effectiveness of evidence-based practices in interventions for children and youth with ASD. 24 evidence-based practices were identified which met defined factors for sufficient evidence of efficacy. The study stressed that while not all intervention practices need to be employed, those that are appropriate for students' needs must be carefully selected and implemented fully. This implementation should be systematic, documented, and coached in order to maintain effectiveness over time. Applied behavior analysis, or ABA, is one of the evidence-based practices suggested in the 2010 article by Odom et al. ABA has a significant amount of backing from research and practitioners. Camargo and Rispoli's 2013 article details this intervention's proven ability to improve skills in the areas of communication, social, academic, and adaptive behaviors of individuals with ASD. Sehan and Obedience 2016 article, Establishing a Common Vocabulary for Key Concepts for the Effective Implementation of Applied Behavior Analysis, calls for just what the title suggests. While technical language is necessary for research and development in this field, when it comes to day-to-day implementation, a common language will allow for an increase in practitioners available for interventions while also decreasing the amount of necessary professional development to familiarize those who do not specialize in this field with the critical language for implementation. Implementation is a key struggle in effective intervention with ASD students. According to Fishman, Bidas, Reisinger, and Mandel, while school-based interventions can result in profound social, behavioral, and academic improvements for students with autism, teachers rarely implement them. Low implementation rates has led to studies focused on determining the reasons behind why this occurs. One contributing factor for this is a lack of effective ABA-based programs in public education. According to Odom, Cox, and Brock, the increased prevalence of ASD has increased the need to provide high-quality services in public school settings, utilizing evidence-based practices. Several barriers to adopting, implementing, and maintaining ABA intervention programs exist at this level and include a need for increased funding, a need for collaborative teacher and support staff training, a need for increased preparedness to implement on the part of special education administrators, and the need for a revised role of ABA and autism researchers. Further studies completed have shown that teacher intention and attitude correlate with level of implementation and therefore effectiveness of intervention. Fishman et al. Suggested in order to combat this, that specific actions of interventions and required frequency should be identified, that this frequency should be tracked, that teacher intention should be surveyed, that access to needed materials and classroom support should be increased, and that teacher-focused interventions targeting attitudes, norms, and self-efficacy should be implemented. It is also suggested that teacher preparation and professional development systems be improved to increase the quality of services and promote teachers' use of evidence-based practices. Lack of implementation of evidence-based practices due to teacher attitudes and intentions also results in poorly implemented systems of inclusion. The findings of the study by Tomek and Jelena showed a need for increased professional development for educators in the area of developmental disabilities, which would in turn increase teacher confidence, decrease fears and concerns, and allow for improved inclusive educational environments. By doing this, systems of intervention can be better generalized to all settings for students with ASD, therefore improving their opportunities for skill acquisition and growth. In conclusion, the field of ASD and evidence-based practices is ever growing and improving. It is important that we embrace this evolving field, challenging ourselves to be lifelong learners in regards to ASD students and best practices so that we may continue to meet their needs with increasing effectiveness over time. Thank you for joining me. Goodbye.